This morning, I talked about the shooting that took place in Austin at great length. A man lost his life because he approached a vehicle that was surrounded by rioters, or whatever you want to call them, man, a group of people who were agitated and angry, and he had a rifle. Now, I've seen some stories about maybe like the guy maybe got out of his car. I don't know the full details, but I do know if you walk around with a rifle, which is your legal right, but at a moment and within protests that have escalated into riots where people have died and people have shot people in vehicles, don't be surprised if you lose your life. But now we need to talk about what we're really seeing in the bigger picture, because there was more than just that one moment that I didn't talk about. In Seattle, an officer was rushed to the hospital after one of these far left extremists threw an explosive device which detonated, I believe, near his leg, close enough to cause a serious injury. They had to rush him to the hospital. I hope he's okay. One report says it detonated on his knee. 20 other officers were injured. What we're seeing as escalating well beyond a protest, well beyond riots. You can call it insurrection, you can call it whatever, but it is the literal definition of terror. Now, some people don't want to go there. I think a lot of people went there a long time ago, but I want to make sure I'm clear on this. I want to talk about this news and show you what happened in Seattle. They burned down construction buildings which were helping to build a youth detention center. They didn't like the idea of a youth detention center, so they destroyed it. They showed up to the homes of politicians in Seattle, demanding political action, vandalizing the homes, and even telling them to leave the city. And this was done with the aid of a Seattle City Councilwoman who led these extremists, and as an extremist herself, to the home of the mayor and 2 other council members. In Oakland, they showed up to the home of the mayor and vandalized her home. They are using force to coerce government officials into supporting their political agenda. I bring you the literal definition of terror. And it's worse than that as this expands because, well, what we're seeing in many instances has no real goal other than the complete destruction of the system. In Aurora, Colorado, a protester got shot. How? A Jeep had driven down the highway where protesters were walking. The protesters were chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, racist cops have got to go." Then when this car drives by, a protester unloads, hitting another protester. And a man who's filming says, "This is what the Aurora police has done. This is what they've done because they did not block traffic." I'm paraphrasing, but to the best of my ability, that's what he said. How incredible. When this person in Austin got shot and killed, people were saying, how come it took so long for the police to get here and help him? Shocking, isn't it? Seems to make no sense. You're literally marching on a highway saying the police have got to go now. Then they seemingly do. And so someone shoots randomly at a car, and once again, they still blame the police. This is the true danger that we're facing. They are using threats of violence, deliberate acts of violence against politicians and the general public to demand we bend our knees to their fringe ideology that would see nothing other than chaos. So I want to show you this from the FBI's website. They say, there is no single universally accepted definition of terrorism. It's important. Terrorism is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations as, quote, the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. I believe we have now crossed that line overtly. Overtly. I know. A lot of people are probably saying, Tim, we've been there for a long time. You're right. We have. They went around rioting months ago. But when they go beyond a nebulous target of destroying a building, literally show up at the homes of mayors and politicians and throw explosives at police and target the federal building, making demands, using violence against the feds. We are now facing overt terrorism. And to be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure we actually need that federal statute for the most part. And the reason is the things these people are doing, it's already illegal. You know, it's like what people talk about, when they talk about hate laws, that often these things being done are already illegal. But when you look to the UK, you can see, well, they're not. They literally try to make hate speech illegal in the UK. I believe they basically have. They want to do it here. Well, speech is legal, but make it hateful. Now it's illegal. You see what they're trying to do. They're trying to create new crimes out of things that aren't. Well, let's do this. I want to show you this, and I want to show you what brings us to this point. I want to talk about a conspiracy theory floating around on the left. But first, let's read about what happened in Seattle, because I did not talk about this in my earlier segment, but it needs to be talked about. Explosives are used against feds and cops in Seattle, Portland, and Atlanta, while BLM protester is shot dead during Austin March on night of nationwide unrest, as angry Trump vents on Twitter after deploying federal agents in a bid to quell violence. I want to tell you all, it never stopped. It's getting worse. And I am confident it is helping Trump. Does it mean Trump will win? I'm not sure. But I do know that regular people are getting scared. They're getting scared. People are dying. And regular people aren't protesting. It is a fringe minority that is out rioting and protesting. So regular people will not sympathize with them when the protesters themselves say in Aurora, literally shoot people and then complain the cops weren't there. They say Black Lives Matter protests erupted into violence across the country last night as explosive devices were used against federal officers in Seattle and Portland, and a demonstrator was shot dead in Austin. One protester was shot and killed when gunshots were fired during. I did cover this. If you haven't seen it, it's on this channel. This comes as protests gathered steam across several U.S. cities Saturday, 2 months on from from the death of George Floyd. Let's move forward and get to Seattle specifically. The streets of Seattle turned violent Saturday when protesters set fire to a youth detention center and a police precinct. Other protesters threw rocks, bottles, fireworks, and other explosives at cops. With the unrest leading local authorities to declare protests had turned into riots that afternoon. Meanwhile, tensions mounted in Chicago, with protests taking place all across the Windy City, including a Back the Blue rally in support of the police, while residents brace for the force of the feds. Cities that have so far avoided the wrath, I'm not going to list all the cities that have avoided it. We can see here these protesters holding up signs saying, Black Lives Matter, defund CPD, etc. I want to jump down now specifically to Seattle. They say, in Seattle, violence flared long before nightfall when people went on a rampage torching buildings in the city, while a wall of moms and vets took to the street vowing to protect demonstrators from law enforcement. I want to stop this right here because this is an important bit of counter propaganda. If you are going around throwing explosives at people, cop or otherwise, and burning buildings down, they say the wall of moms and vets are protecting demonstrators. No, they are the frontline defensive unit for terrorism. Period. End of story. I'm not here to argue this. Listen, if somebody is robbing a bank and a bunch of moms link arms to protect the bank robber from the police, they're robbing the bank with him. You see? Just because you're not the one pointing the weapon or using it, it doesn't make you you are an accomplice. You can't feign, non-involvement. We were just protecting people from the police. Right. The people you're protecting were terrorists. You get it? Around 2,000 people descended on the city as protests that had tempered following the dismantling of the CHOP zone earlier this month inflamed once more. In fact, rumor is they're trying to reclaim the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Trump said he was sending in federal troops, blah, blah, blah. Seattle police declared the protest in Seattle a riot just before 4:30 p.m. local time Saturday afternoon as people vandalized the East Police Precinct, set a small fire, and an explosive was left off inside the building. Surveillance cameras were damaged in the onslaught, while some demonstrators tried to tear down a fence protecting the precinct. Rioters, extremists, call them something else. I see demonstrator, they're trying to avoid saying protester, it seems. Individuals spray painting on the East Precinct at 12th and Pine are attempting to disable cameras and damage fence perimeter around the building, Seattle Police Department tweeted. Due to the ongoing damage and public safety risks, the SPD is declaring it a riot. The construction site of the new King County Juvenile Detention Facility was also engulfed in flames after a group marched on the building demanding it be closed before setting fire to the area. This is terror. Now, here's a photo of what police say. They've duct taped 2 of these smoke bombs of some sort together. It says protesters in Seattle threw rocks, bottles, fireworks, and other explosives at cops, with the unrest leading local authorities to declare protests had turned into riots that afternoon. Here's what they say is the important part. At least 45 people have been arrested and 21 cops were injured, including one who was rushed to the hospital after an explosive went off on his leg. There was still no sign of Trump's federal troops in the early hours of Sunday, despite repeated threats from the president that his agents would restore law and order in Democrat-led cities. No, Donald Trump has vowed to protect the federal buildings. And in fact, it's the media that keeps conflating Operation Legend and Diligent Valor with Well, actually, a better way to put it is it's not just that they're conflating two different operations. They're conflating the fact that in Portland, federal officers are defending a courthouse with violent riots moving throughout the cities. It is not the same thing, but the media is not doing a good job of contextualizing what's actually happening. This is what journalists need to be doing. Avoiding the micro and giving you context on the macro. Yes, an individual might see a riot in Portland and say the feds are attacking protesters or whatever. When you zoom out, you see 59 nights of riots targeting specifically, or for the most part, not completely, the federal courthouse and the Justice Center. And when the far left attacks that building, the feds come out to defend it, notably when they start fires. The media has conflated this defense of a federal building with the idea that unmarked, unidentified secret police from private organizations are marching through the streets, rounding people up, beating them, and it's just not happening. They say a so-called wall of moms joined the Seattle riots in solidarity with similar walls that have sprung up. So if you want to defend extremists who threw an explosive at a police going off on his leg, you are not a wall of moms. You're just another wall of rioters. End of story. Fine, we can call it a wall of moms, but they're rioting all the same. And this is, in my definition, according to the federal definition, it's overt terror. Now, I'll tell you why this happens. This happens because what we are seeing is the expansion of far left conspiracy theories unchecked. You may have seen this earlier, or the past few days. QAnon banned completely from Twitter. Links and posts and users, thousands of users. The other night, apparently Jesse Waters on Fox News entertained the value of QAnon in some capacity. I don't know exactly what his point was. He said some good things about them. I personally don't necessarily agree, but to be honest, I don't follow any Q stuff other than the general concept of what it is. Something about Trump going up against the deep state, whatever. On Fox News, they talked about it. They talked about Twitter banning it. And journalist Yashar Ali said that Jesse Waters had endorsed this fringe conspiracy group. Okay, well, here's the problem. ZT1 patch on Portland agent in viral photo is an identifier for anonymity. This is Heavy.com doing a good job debunking a fringe conspiracy theory that claims that the ZT1 patch on this man's arm is actually ZTI. Okay. ZTI is an infrastructure security company, and I'm sure many other things, but the far left can push this conspiracy theory across the board through various media outlets because they get their news mostly from memes. Okay, that's a bad thing. You see, many on the right would get their news from memes, but many of those meme smiths have been banned completely for making these memes. The left? No. So long as social media allows them to post fringe conspiracy theories, they will keep believing nonsensical, psychotic nonsense. And this is where we are today. It's not just about the ZT1 patch. It's about what's going on in Portland altogether. And I mentioned this in my main channel segment and before, and then I want to come back and show you what some of these people are doing in Aurora, for instance. But I want to point this out. If the left says something like unidentified vehicle, with police in it, detains protester. Someone else writes a story saying unknown people. Someone else then claimed, what if it was a right-wing militia? Now I'm personally being sent walls. A friend of mine sent me a wall of tweets saying I was wrong about what's going on in Portland and that Eric Prince and Blackwater are sending out private militias and paramilitary units to beat and attack people, which is some of the most insane garbage I've ever heard. And of course, seriously, I got sent like 50 screenshots of all the people confirming it. Yes, confirming nothing because it's not true. They were like, it's a private group. It's a private group. Here's the proof. ZTI. Nope. Now, because of the fake news, they are pushing a fringe conspiracy theory that Trump is employing tactical security for international security agents, giving them money because it's his crony. They eat it all up. So they believe it. They go insane. They like to talk a lot about how that dude who showed up to that pizza place with a gun and fired into the ground. You may remember that story. They say, see the violence these conspiracy theories lead to? I absolutely, like Portland. These people believe insane things like the 1619 Project. Just absolute fake news. And historians have come out and said it's not true what they're saying. The 1619 Project, of course, being the New York Times series talking about how the U.S. was actually founded the day the first slave came, and the War of Independence was to maintain a slavocracy, and it's all not true. Pulitzer Prize winning historians have said no. But why are they allowed to entertain fringe conspiracy theories? For whatever reason, man. And maybe it'll be their downfall. You know why? Maybe it'll be their downfall because people don't like it. Regular people don't want this. Regular people don't agree with this. As we've seen from the Cato Institute poll, I will cite this as good. It's a good bit of evidence. A little bit more than half of far leftists are comfortable expressing their political opinions. Moderate liberals, moderates, conservatives, and strong conservatives they all feel that they cannot express their opinions. And it's because social media will ban you if you do, unless you push far left insane conspiracies like Russiagate, for instance. Which brings me to a post like this. I tweeted, hey, ho ho, these racist cops have got to go. Dude gets shot by protester. Quote, that's what the Aurora Police Department did. That's what they did because they failed to hold traffic. This is what you get. Economic disruption, violence, death, murder, injury, chaos. And then, as soon as that happens, they beg for the police to come on back. So what are they really fighting for? Nothing. It's fringe conspiracy nonsense. But they are using terror to instill rules and laws against regular people based on just absolute insanity. I tell you what, man, it's going to get worse. And I wonder how much worse it could get. Could you imagine if maybe this is as bad as it gets. Maybe it is. They're already claiming like all white people are racist. They want to abolish the police. Think about how psychotic that is. Last year, according to the Washington Post, 13 unarmed black people were shot and killed by police. 13. Now, as for, say, police brutality incidents, I don't know for sure. But 13. Because of this, they want to outright abolish all police. And some people are saying defund. But then as soon as they encounter problems, they beg for the help of the police. In Seattle, when protesters for, I believe, 19 days in a row were dancing on the highway, literally dancing on a highway at night around a corner, and a car swerved through and hit somebody, they immediately yelled, call the police. They don't actually want anything. They are just insane people who have been driven insane by broken social media companies allowing the expansion of fringe conspiracy nonsense. Now, full disclosure, I suppose I'm totally in favor of free speech. Let them speak. Let them do their thing. You are allowed to post fake news. But this is what happens, in my opinion, when no one is allowed to counter the narrative. And social media algorithms prop up this insanity. I don't know how you solve the problem. I would lean towards more speech. The only issue, they've completely imbalanced everything. And now even liberals are scared to speak up. I believe that if we had something like Section 230 reform, which would restore the right of free speech to all people, even if they have nasty opinions, it would actually solve a lot of these problems. You know why? You wouldn't get this kind of psychotic narrative about, say, 1619, because you'd have people countering that with harder opinions, and it would restore balance a little bit. Liberals would start speaking up. Moderates would start speaking up. And even conservatives and strong conservatives, that's how the Cato describes them, would start speaking up. That could rebalance the conversation and make people on the far left scared to express psychotic views, and on the far right scared to express psychotic views. Right now, they say social media is polarizing everybody to the far left and the far right. I do not believe that's the case. The far right has been banned entirely. They're scared to speak. I believe it's polarizing people between far left and those who oppose them, talking about only what they can talk about, but certainly at the far left. It's created a more center-right versus fringe far-left extremist narrative. That's where we're really at. And they call, because to them, moderate conservatives are far-right. That's what they say. They say, you're far-right. Tucker Carlson is far-right. I did a segment where I said Tucker Carlson's actually a moderate conservative who agreed with Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks on a bunch of populist economic proposals during a debate at Politicon. That's a fact. You can watch the video yourself. And the far leftists shriek and clip the video saying, Tim actually thinks Tucker Carlson is a moderate conservative? Yeah, he is. And he's an economic populist. How incredible is that? He criticized Jeff Bezos for making money during the pandemic, and Sean Hannity criticized him back. Yes, Tucker Carlson is an economic populist, a bit of an elite himself, to be fair, but he's not far right. He's not an ultra traditionalist. He doesn't go on rants about, getting women out of the workplace or some nonsense like that. He doesn't. He just talks about, to be completely honest, classical liberalism. He's not a classical liberal. He's a moderate or, center-right conservative. But a lot of the stuff he talks about is agreeable for much of the population, and it's why he has the highest rated cable TV program in history. They're trying to get him banned. They're stripping him of his advertisers and trying to shut his show down. And when they do that, you will end up with nothing more than fringe conspiracy lunatics who will burn down the entire system. And it's happening. I wonder why it is you don't see CNN wall-to-wall coverage. An officer had an explosive go off on his leg, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. I hope he's okay. Nope. MSNBC? Nope. Local news outlets? Nope. The New York Times? No. I looked. I did. I tried to find a story from a mainstream publication like the Wall Street Journal, whatever. I couldn't find it. Maybe they'll write about it. Maybe I missed it. That's fair. But my initial assessment didn't come up. And so I looked at a local outlet. A local news outlet didn't even report that the explosive went off on his leg. And I'm like, why is this? They allude to it, right? That's the weird thing. They say, due to an explosive, an officer was rushed to the hospital. He had a knee injury. I'm like, what do you mean by that? What happened? They're careful. They won't say it. When the NFAC came out in Louisville, how many outlets said fringe, black supremacist group? None. Maybe some conservative ones, maybe some smaller blogs, but no mainstream news outlet. They just said armed militia. And that's the problem of the skewed discourse, and it will lead to overt terrorism like we're seeing now. I'll leave it there. Next segment will be at 4 p.m. over at timcast.net, and I will see you then.